Alien Girl was offered to the highest bidder, but one human stood and said, no. They called it the Black Ring, a drifting bazaar of shadow and profit orbiting a dying star, where credits ruled and morality expired at the airlock, and today it was full, not with goods or weapons or rare minerals, but with a single girl, the alien princess, paraded before a room of buyers, all with hands slicked from their own empires, gathered in silence, breath caught like predators admiring. Pray? While she stood beneath the cruel display lights with wrists bound in photonic cuffs that shimmered faintly against her pale, shimmering skin, which looked more like stardust wrapped around bone than flesh, her hair falling like liquid moonlight over narrow shoulders as the auctioneer's voice sliced through the chamber, listing traits like a recipe, genetic purity, celestial ancestry, hybrid adaptability, and not once did he mention that she had a name, that she had a voice, that she was someone, because here, in the depths of that spinning black market, she was not a person, only a price, and each bidder raised their slates. As if tossing bloodied coins into the silence of history, the numbers climbing, rising, swelling into madness until one voice rose not with a number, but a word, no, and the room shifted, not in noise but in tension, like a wire snapping, because no one said no at the Black Ring, not to power, not to trade, not to tradition, and yet the human stood, tall, alone, unarmed, dressed not in wealth, but in worn fabric marked with forgotten insignias from a war no one dared mention anymore. And he stepped forward, past the guards who moved too late, past the auctioneer whose voice faltered, and looked directly into her eyes, not her collar, not her price tag, but her eyes, and said again, quieter this time, no, like it was. An oath carved into stone, and in that frozen moment she looked at him, really looked, and something behind her silence cracked. Because no one had seen her in weeks, not since her capture, not since her world was betrayed and sold off piece by piece, not since the chains first touched her skin, but this human, this defiant stranger, met her with something she barely recognized. Any more dignity, and she felt her knees tremble, not from weakness, but because some ancient part of her, royal or sacred or simply alive, dared to hope. And when the guards finally surged toward him, he moved like a storm, not with brute strength, but with precision, disabling one with a twist, the other with a blow to the throat, spinning past the third and wrenching a blaster from his belt without firing a single shot, just pointing it at the control panel that governed the auction chamber, and when the lights dimmed, when the floor trembled, when the crowd panicked and scattered like insects exposed to light, he moved to her side and whispered something she didn't understand but felt like safety, then shattered her cuffs with a tool he'd hidden in his boot, and for the first time since her captivity, she moved of her own will, her hands trembling, her breathing ragged, as he took her wrist, not tightly, but gently, offering guidance, not ownership, and pulled her through a side corridor none of the guards thought to block, into a maintenance hatch that led downward into darkness, through fumes and heat and low-gravity shafts lined with wires that sparked and hissed around them, and she ran, faster than she thought her legs could go, guided by the light of the human's torch and the pounding of her own heart. Through hidden vents and sealed doors he seemed to know by instinct, until they reached a small freighter hidden in a shadow dock, barely functional, hull patched with mismatched plates and reactor buzzing like a hive, and she hesitated, because escape meant trust, and trust meant risk, but he turned to her, no demands in his face, only an open palm and eyes that asked instead of ordered, and she stepped aboard, not because she had no choice, but because for the first time she was being offered one, and as the ship pulled away, slipping past patrol beacons and sensor sweeps and automated kill satellites, the Black Ring disappeared behind them, swallowed by its own decay, and she collapsed into a corner of the cabin, exhausted, filthy, unsure if this freedom was real. But when he handed her a blanket and didn't ask anything in return, not even her name, she looked at him and whispered it anyway, and he nodded, repeating it back with reverence, like it was sacred, and in that moment she felt more seen than in her entire royal life, more real than in any of the temples her people had built to honor her blood. And though she didn't know what came next, or where they would go, or who still hunted her, one truth rang louder than all the credits. In the galaxy, someone had said no and meant it. The auction hall was silent now, the last echoes of rebellion still lingering like smoke in the air, and the alien princess, once a commodity displayed under sterile lights, was no longer just an item listed in the catalog of imperial cruelty. She was someone seen, someone chosen, and someone shielded by a defiance so rare it stunned the elite into stillness. Outside, the neon wash of Kareth's upper district bled down the rain-soaked walls, tinting everything in electric hues of blue and red. The human who had shouted no, Elias Marrow, walked beside her in silence, his heart still pounding from the standoff with the auctioneer's guards, his mind working double time to figure out how to protect her from the fallout of his boldness. His intervention had caused a stir among the corporate bidders, military brokers, and syndicate dealers. It wasn't just a financial interruption. It was an ideological crime. No one refused the trade accord. No one rejected the galactic system that allowed living beings to be paraded and purchased like machines. And yet Elias had. Not with a weapon, but with his voice, with conviction. The alien princess, still shackled at the wrists and dazed from the neural dampeners, walked barefoot next to him, unsure if what had happened was a glitch in the timeline or a miracle in disguise. She hadn't spoken since he stopped the auction, not because she didn't want to, but because her voice had been suppressed for so long she wasn't sure it would matter. Her language chip blinked inside her neck, flashing amber from forced inactivity. Elias saw it and made a mental note to deactivate the suppression tag once they were somewhere safe. They moved through the underside of the city, avoiding transport lanes and surveillance orbs, ducking through maintenance shafts and old colonial service tunnels that once served refugee routes before being condemned. Elias had memorized every path, every shadow, every backup exit. He wasn't a soldier or a diplomat. He was an engineer with a conscience, and that made him dangerous in ways the empires never predicted. He wasn't supposed to be in the auction room. He wasn't supposed to raise his voice. And he wasn't supposed to take her hand. But he had done all three. Now they were fugitives. The alien princess stumbled, and Elias caught her, steadying her with a gentle hand at the small of her back. She flinched not from fear, but from disbelief. No one had touched her with that kind of softness in cycles. Her silver hair, tangled and dull from months in captivity, glistened faintly under leaking pipelight. "We're almost there," Elias said softly, trying to speak in universal tongue, hoping the translator would pick up enough to reassure her. She met his eyes for a moment, searching for trickery, but found only quiet urgency. When they finally reached the service lift at the edge of Sector 10, Elias keyed in an override code. The lift doors hissed open to reveal a modest room filled with scattered tools, a battered cot, and walls lined with data cores. It was his personal refuge, his real home, away from the noise of compliance. The moment they entered, Elias activated a local disruptor field to block trackers. Then he knelt beside her, examined the suppressor band on her neck, and said, "I'm going to disable this. It might sting." She nodded slowly, blinking as if still unsure if this was real. When the band deactivated with a soft chime, her breath caught. For the first time in nearly a year, her lungs felt free. Her throat tightened with the weight of unspoken things, and tears welled in her golden eyes, not from pain, but from the return of something sacred, autonomy. "My name is Elias," he said. "I'm not here to hurt you." It took her a moment, but then her voice came, soft, accented, but strong. "They never ask our names," she whispered. "What is yours?" He asked. She hesitated, then said, "It's slowly, Tari Vexa." The name shimmered in the air like ancient poetry. Ilias repeated it under his breath, as if to memorize something precious. "Tari Vexa," he said again, softer. "You're not property anymore." She lowered her gaze. "I was born a queen's daughter, but my people were scattered. My name was struck from record. Now I'm just one of many taken." Elias knelt beside her, eyes steady. "That name, they'll erase it from every system, but I won't let them." She looked at him, uncertain. "You cannot stop them." "Then I'll outlive them," he said. That night she slept in his cot, curled against the wall, while Elias sat awake on the floor, watching the door, holding a makeshift weapon crafted from tools and charged wire. He didn't sleep. He couldn't. Too much was at risk. In the morning he took a blade and carved her name into the titanium panel behind the cot, the letters alien and beautiful, a vow etched into the bones of his refuge. He began researching. Old back channels, resistance pockets, smuggling networks, anyone who might help him get her off-world. She watched quietly, sometimes helping him when she could. Her people had been master navigators once, star singers who could align solar paths by resonance alone. In time, she began to trust him, not with naivety, but with measured hope. One evening, as he examined a fractured hyperdrive shard, she knelt beside him and whispered, "Why me?" Elias looked at her. "Because no one else did. Because when they silenced your name, I still heard it." Her lip trembled. "They will come for us." "Then let them," he said. "They'll learn what happens when you try to bury a name that still burns in someone's chest." She reached out, touching the place where he'd etched her name. Into the wall. Her fingers lingered. And in that moment, something ancient passed between them. Not romance, not yet, but recognition. A human and an alien princess, drawn together by something rarer than any weapon, remembrance. The second week, Elias smuggled her out through waste haulers and cargo runs, using forged access cards and old shipyard alliances, Tari Vexa. Dressed in scavenger layers, walked with confidence now. The dignity in her had returned. The scars remained, but they didn't define her. What defined her now was the fact that she had survived and that someone had said no. Word spread, slowly but surely. Whispers of a man who defied the trade accord. Of an alien princess whose name still lived in code and scrap metal. Of stars tattooed in memory. The syndicates offered a bounty. The regime classified her as retrievable intellectual property. But Elias had already made his choice. He wasn't just protecting her. He was preserving a truth the galaxy had tried to erase. Her name, her story, her soul. And as they stood on the edge of a stolen transport vessel weeks later, ready to launch from the moons of Kareth, Tari Vexa turned to him and said, "Even if I die, promise me one thing." "Anything," Elias said. She took his hand and pressed it to her chest. "Don't let them forget I was real." He nodded. "I won't. I swear it." And in the reflection of the viewport, where 1,000,000 stars stretched beyond reach, her name burned on his lips like a vow etched into the cosmos. They came for him before sunrise, boots pounding against the metal floor of the safe house, the iron breath of orbital guards and coalition agents hissing through respirator masks as they surrounded the building. But Cole didn't run, he stood. With the alien princess at his side, her slender fingers clutching his hand, her gaze not filled with fear anymore but something harder, stronger, forged by what they had been through together. They had escaped the auction ring, survived betrayals, evaded the syndicates that wanted her back, but more than anything, they had carved a truth into the galaxy no amount of credits or contracts could erase. She was not for sale. The blast. Doors buckled as the guards stormed in, shouting orders in 10 languages. Pulse rifles raised, and still, Cole did not let go of her hand, even as a barrel was pressed to his temple, even as they ordered him to kneel, and when he did, it was not in surrender but defiance, for behind him stood the alien princess, head high, eyes burning like twin suns, and she stepped forward before anyone could stop her, speaking a name, her real name, not the brand burned into her back by slavers, not the code printed on her auction chip, but the name her mother had given her long before her world fell. The room froze as if the walls themselves were listening, because she spoke in the tongue of her extinct people, and Cole, kneeling, spoke it back. His voice cracked but unwavering, repeating it like a vow, and for a moment the armed men paused, unsure, disarmed by something they could not process. Love unlicensed, unquantified, ungoverned. The officer barked to cuff her, but she raised her hand, and every scanner in the room flared with biolight, her DNA signature blooming across a dozen interfaces, not as a property tag, but as a recognized monarch, because the human who had once stolen her away to protect her had also stolen, from an ancient vault on Edron Prime, the last surviving record of her royal genome. The biometric seal was real. She was no longer a thing. She was sovereign, and in that instant, everything shifted. The agents looked at each other, suddenly unsure of jurisdiction, as Cole rose slowly to his feet, the tattoo on his chest. Her name, in royal script peeking through the torn shirt, and when she turned to him, something passed between them too complex for words, but as simple as breath. They had won. But that didn't mean the war was over. In the weeks that followed, her declaration of autonomy was contested by every government with a stake in her past. Claims were filed, counterclaims issued, bounty prices on Cole's head quadrupled. Yet still he refused protection, refused asylum, instead choosing to stand with her as she addressed the Galactic Assembly, not as a rescued relic but as a Queen One, whose people were gone but whose culture had not died because someone, one stubborn, reckless human, had chosen not to let it. And when she spoke, her voice broadcast across 100 systems, Cole stood behind her silently, not as a savior, not as a protector, but as something rarer, someone who had given her back to herself. The vote that followed was narrow viciously, debated, but in the end, her sovereignty was upheld. She could not be bought, sold, traded. Her DNA could not be claimed. Her name could not be erased. And though there were planets that still whispered slurs about her in dark corners of the black market, she no longer flinched because every night, when she returned to the home they rebuilt together on the ruins of her childhood city, she would trace his tattoo with her fingers and whisper stories in her people's tongue, and he would listen, as he always had, not as a hero, but as a man who had once simply said no when everyone else had looked away. Years passed, and in time, others came, survivors, descendants, refugees who had hidden their lineage in fear, and together they began to call themselves a people again, not a kingdom, not a bloodline, but a family. And at the heart of it stood the alien. Princess, now queen not by title, but by the way she made broken things feel whole again. On the anniversary of the day she was nearly sold, a monument was raised not to her, but to the moment Cole had stood up, one man against a galaxy, and said, "She is not a thing, she is someone." And at its base, carved into stone, in both standard and her ancestral language, were the words that defined them forever. "You gave me your name. I made it my home.